So this morning, I read this article from my newsletter that was essentially describing if they were to redistribute the wealth of the top 10 billionaires, which is approximately $1.8 trillion amongst all of the people in the United States, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And so they determined that if they were to redistribute just those top 10 earners to all of the United States, it'd be about $5,000 per person.
Hmm.
Like a substantial amount of money to some people, not so much to others. But then it occurred to me that not only would that be beneficial, at least in the short term, for a fair amount of people, because obviously it's got to be like a one time thing, because if you're redistributing all of their wealth, they don't have wealth anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But essentially, by doing that, there would be an additional knock on effect that the article doesn't necessarily talk about, which it all just occurred to me as I was reading it that essentially, right now, all of the wealth that these people have and that companies have, whether it be in their stocks or whatever the case may be, because a lot of these wealthy people, they own a lot of assets. And so, like I've listened and I've talked about, that Gary's economics guy
Right.
multiple times now. And he's kind of described something similar. And I think it just, like, it's clicked to me now more than ever how what he's been saying makes a lot of sense. It just took this for it to finally, like, kind of all come together for me. And so essentially, if you have $1.8 trillion that 10 wealthy billionaires have, and this isn't all billionaires, it's just the top 10, and you took that money and redistributed it and gave it to people, what are people going to do with the money? You just tell me, like, what's your first assumption? It doesn't matter anything. It doesn't matter.
Spend it.
You're going to spend it. What are wealthy people not doing? They're not spending it. And because they're not spending it, that means it just sits there and it just accrues over time. And it's not getting put
Mm-hmm.
back into the system in a meaningful way. And so that means, essentially, for example, you and I and anybody else that's working class that actually has a job, we all pay income tax. And so that means we go, we work, we put our labor out there, and then we get taxed on top of that labor, which ends up going back to the government for goods and services that we more than likely use, like streets and roads and bridges and all that type of
Mm-hmm.
stuff, water, septic, all the good stuff. And we're essentially paying for those services out of our taxes because we're actually spending our money in most cases, or we're actually doing labor and we're receiving a paycheck in some form or another. Some
Right.
people may own homes, some people may own other things, and in the same way, they're paying property taxes or whatever the case may be. So we're actually paying our taxes. We're paying into that system, and so therefore the government has revenue to then put it back out into the world in a way that we see tangible benefit for that. But with these incredibly wealthy individuals, given a lot of their wealth is tied up in essentially their personal piggy banks, which is essentially all their assets. So if you're an Elon Musk who has a lot of your wealth is tied up in Tesla stock or SpaceX stock or X or any of one of his, several different companies at this point, if it's all tied up in all those different stocks, then he can essentially take out loans against the value of those stocks and never actually have to sell it, which is where he would get capital gains tax on that, which is where he would actually get taxed for the value of all that stuff he has. If we actually had a better tax system where just by owning an asset you could be taxed on it, that would probably help solve part of this problem. But because we don't, um, wealthy people can just sit on the value of all the things they own
Mm-hmm.
and never have to pay any taxes for it. They can just borrow against it as long as they want. Whereas for the rest of us, we actually have to pay in and put into the system. But what's even worse is like you said, what do? We end up spending it. So the example I gave to the people I've spoken to about this before you were, if you say want to go buy a new television, you're just replacing your television. It's been years. It's a little splurge thing you want to do for yourself. You've been wanting a new TV. You're going to buy a new TV. So you go to Best Buy. You buy the new TV. It's however many, like we'll just say $500, just as an example. And whatever profit they make on that, what can the company then do with that profit? Well, obviously they have to pay their employees and they have to do all the, like, they have their expenses they have to pay first. So they have to pay all their expenses with that $500. But the portion of that that's left, as far as their profit goes, they can then essentially choose what they want to do with that at the end of the day. So, in the same sort of way, as a wealthy individual such as a Musk or Bezos or whatever, a company can then say, well, I'm going to buy my own stock back, stock buybacks, if you've ever heard the term. And so by buying their own stock back, they are essentially putting money into their own company's little personal piggy bank, because essentially they're naturally inflating the value of their own stock at that point.
Right.
In the same way, by doing that, that money is not going back into the system and is not getting redistributed as intended. And so essentially every time we have to do something that we have to do, so say it's buy groceries, say it's get gas, say, it's anything that essentially you have to do on a regular basis just to be able to survive, you're more than likely getting taxed on that in some sort of way. Because, there's going to be sales tax on your groceries,
Right.
there's going to be gas tax when you buy your gas, all that type of stuff. But again, this company putting that money away into its personal little stock piggy bank means they don't necessarily have to pay any of that type of stuff, just like a wealthy individual wouldn't have to. And so what that results in is that there's less and less money over time that is actually in the pool of overall money that people can have at the end of the day. And so that means that the longer that this goes on for, where we have essentially a crappy tax system that does not work in the way it should, where you allow a lot of people to accrue exorbitant amounts of wealth as they have, and you allow businesses to become increasingly large and large and large to where it's just exponentially, they're just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. It's because we have to buy things. We have to spend in order to survive. And so each time we spend, it gets taken away a little bit, piece by piece by piece, not only by the government, which is taxing, but that ultimately goes back to services that we use. So at least there's a kind of a net neutral thing with that. But because we're having to buy a service from a company, those companies then get to do whatever they want with the excess.
Right.
Which then means it gets put off to the side and gets taken out of the system away from us. And so when you think about an overall pool of the total dollar amount that's available in society, if you say there's $1 trillion total, just as an example, and all of those companies and all those wealthy individuals own 50% of all of the available money of that $1 trillion, so $500 billion collectively, and that means between the rest of us, there's only $500 billion left to go around. And slowly but surely over time, as we continue to buy more things as we have to, as a natural part of our spending, the way we survive is we have to spend. Over time, they get to take more and more of that money and siphon it into their half of the overall pool of money, meaning they increase to 55%, 60%, so on and so forth, until eventually there's nothing left for the rest of us. We're all poor, we're all in poverty, the middle class has essentially been shrunk and completely depleted, and there's nothing left.
Mm-hmm.
All that's left is everything they've taken, which means that the only way to solve the problem is you must find a way to tax that money and bring it back into the system. Otherwise, it will all be taken away over time. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.